Hey, Monotype is packing its bags and heading to South by Southwest this year. And there are two important dates we want to tell you about. On March 13th, we'll be hosting the very first live recording of Creative Characters, and we'd love you to join us for a conversation about the reasons we fall in love with fonts and why it matters to all of us in the creative world. There'll be an audience Q&A and a fun hands-on activity with our type design team. Oh, and food and drinks too. You can register for this event on our website. Go to mntype.co/SXSW. That's mntype.co/SXSW. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Then, on March 14th, we'll be hosting a panel discussion that explores the building blocks of a modern brand. It'll be moderated by our longtime Creative Characters host, Charles Nix, along with leaders from Pantone, Getty Images, and Canva. You're not going to want to miss it. Register on the South by Southwest website. That's sxsw.com. And search for the ingredients for building a modern brand. Say hello to us if you do come by. We hope to see you there. Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Phil, and I'm here today with my co-host, Charles. How you doing, Charles?
I'm good. I don't often get to record with you. We talk every day, but we rarely commit ourselves to recording, so it's great to be here. So Monotype recently published its latest trends report, and you and I worked on that a couple of years ago. We've been involved with it pretty regularly. This report digs into the most compelling typographic trends that our team of people at Monotype are seeing out in the wild. So if you haven't read it, folks, check it out on monotype.com right now.
I guess to expand on this idea of type trends, we wanted to really zoom in on a few regions around the world and ask designers what trends, are you seeing where you live?
Yeah, and to answer that question, we spoke to folks we admire, like studios that are based in 4 different cities around the world: New York, Santiago, Paris, and Kuala Lumpur. So this episode is going to include 4, let's call them mini interviews with type and design thought leaders from around the world. And Phil, your conversation with Jolene Delisle is going to kick things off. Can you tell me a little bit about Jolene and her studio?
Yeah, of course. Jolene is a fearless creative leader in New York City, as you know, and her branding and creative agency, The Working Assembly, advocates for typographic personality, distinctiveness, and fun above all things. I mean, her agency is, really exploring some interesting typography. They're putting so much personality, into the brands. You can almost see their clients encapsulated in the letter shapes of their work. So I think they're doing some fascinating work.
Thanks, Phil. We'll hand it over to you and Jolene for the first conversation. Take it away.
Jolene Delisle, welcome to our very special Type Trends 24 podcast. It's a huge pleasure to have you join us as we continue to explore the subconscious superpowers of type trends, particularly at this unique and very frantic time in the world.
Well, one, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and excited to chat about type, one of my favorite things to ever discuss and talk about. So,
it's a pleasure. So, Jolene, you are a founder and creative director of the Working Assembly in New York, and I think you are making some of the most typographically trend-aware kind of brands out there right now. I'm a huge fan of your work, especially of the logo type you did for Marin Living Foods, and this super fluid, cursive identity that you made there. It's a thing of beauty. So in this podcast, it's all about type trends. What have you been seeing this year in New York? Is there a scene right now with type? Is there any specific trends that are emerging?
Well, yeah, so I think New York is always kind of at the forefront of type and trends. We're so fortunate to have such a cultural epicenter here, and we're able to kind of see very early on things that are emerging and coming up. And I think one of the things that we've been seeing a lot has been so much around 3D typefaces and type treatments. So we're seeing a lot of out of home emerging that is dimensional. And I think a lot of the type that's working there too has been thinking about how to create type that is not just moving, but also really expressive, dynamic, has dimensionality. I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of in the coming year as well. And then You mentioned Marin Living Foods. I love that project. And I think as soon as you do a project, you then become hyper aware if it is, to your point, like really trendy. And I have seen quite a lot of this like expressive, cursive, almost like thick, bubbly type. And I think that is something that, was perfect for this milk brand, which is, what MLF is. But I think I've seen it now being used quite a lot for other type projects as well. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that is kind of passing or current and how that brand work will kind of hold up. Hopefully it will, but, that's something to think about as things become, part of the moment. You become much more aware of that.
Yeah, totally. I think why that's so successful is because it feels of the moment, but it also feels evolved from a lot of other things I've seen in that area, that fluid kind of very gestural kind of style. I mean, when you were art directing that, was there like a specific intention, or were you kind of like looking at other things or other typefaces that are similar to that? And was there a strategic kind of play around the typeface there?
Yeah, it's interesting because the letters of Marin, Marin, they work so well in a lowercase form. And then the M and the N also almost make like a anagram where like you could almost think about, that was actually our original intention, was thinking, could we make an anagram of this? Like, could it work both front and back, almost being read the same way? And then there was this fluidity when we were drawing it, this idea of kind of the milk or liquidity, and this idea of a kind of fluid motion that kind of started imbuing itself into the type as we were creating it. And so that was really the intention there. It just naturally happened because the letters itself almost dictated that.
Yeah, I think you've totally really nailed it. Like in terms of like, for me, I guess like for me, the most successful brand typography is when you can really see the product in the letter forms, or you can see like an element of the values or the essence of the thing like displayed in the type.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and it works, right, for some things, and other things it can feel quite like trite and like almost trying too hard. So you have to strike that balance of whether it's something that would be impactful or something that would just feel too like a gimmick.
Yeah. It's so interesting you mentioned 3D type as well. Like, do you feel like you're seeing a lot of that, right, in New York? Because I'm not sure I'm seeing it here in the UK.
I am seeing it a lot. We're working on a project right now that is in the sports entertainment realm. And, of course, within sports, you always are thinking about leaderboards and, things that could be dynamic if there's a score. But then they're buying a lot of out-of-home space that also has an element of 3D. So it's not just a motion billboard. It's also one that you can actually add some dynamic elements to that kind of protrude out. And so our team is kind of creating some custom type treatments and families right now that are being able to kind of be reactive into those spaces. And it feels really cool, especially for a sports element. It feels really powerful. But, one of our other clients, Times Square, which is, a cultural epicenter within New York City. It's a big hub. They also have a big 3D billboard. And we've been seeing a lot of brands, not just, Times Square, but other brands that are kind of housing big marquee signage there, and they're really taking advantage of the 3D element. So I do think 3D type will become more prevalent, this year.
That's amazing. I mean, what do you think's behind that? What do you feel like there's something driving it?
I do. Like in North America, I think especially like in Vegas right now, we have the Sphere, which is a new event space that has opened up in Vegas. And I think that is a really good example of how designers can start thinking about motion and how it can be impacted within a space that would be so just more dynamic. It's a full 360 sphere, and the way you have to design for that type of space as far as graphics is so different. And I think in general, with the progression of technology, we're just seeing just these new formats being able to be popped up. And I think there is this element of wanting things to feel more dynamic, more playing with virtual reality, all of that.
So do you think it's like more around like design and technology that's kind of driving?
Yeah, the convergence of the two. Yeah, I think that especially with AI and Midjourney and all these things that we're seeing being adapted into designers' workflow, I just think that there's just going to be more and more potential to escape out of kind of the flatness and into things that feel much more like lifelike or dynamic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but like the variable fonts play into this a little bit. Have you seen much uptake in that area at all?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like I would look at 2023 and 2022 as well, being this idea of variability in typefaces. I know we had done a project for this media company, Betches here, that used a whole variability with typeface, and that was a big thing. And when we worked on a couple other brands, we did that with GT America. There was a couple other typefaces we used where, when the fonts have so much variability, you can kind of adapt and customize with different weights, and it felt really dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, now it's feeling quite a little bit more dated, right, to do that. And I think in 2024 and beyond, what we're going to see is that variability happening, but with that dimensionality instead.
I totally agree. And I think it's about to really pop. Like, I think there's a hint of like variability in everything nowadays.
Yes.
But and you sometimes wonder, is that a typeface or is that actually just animation, or is it lettering? Is it a new form of lettering?
Yes. Totally.
The engagement element, I think that's what really excites me about variable fonts and how we can take them to the next level in terms of actually creating genuinely engaging typography, things that we can interact with, letter forms.
Yeah. And the responsive nature of that is so conducive to like digital. So I think that's where if the medium is going more and more towards digital, how might we push type even more that way?
Mm-hmm. Do you see a lot of crossover between what's happening in New York and other areas in North America? Or do you see differences even? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, for sure. We have clients that are on both sides of the coast as well as in the middle. Some of our clients in the Midwest and South actually are really embracing heritage type. It's been interesting to see, this kind of what they've been saying is like blanding of these heritage brands. But I actually think there's going to be a resistance to that that's going to come up soon, where we might actually go back into some of those kind of heritage letter forms. And I see, especially within packaging, I think there's a lot of these heritage brands that are actually really speaking to the millennial and Gen Z customer. Mm-hmm. They really like kind of the organic and handcrafted nature of it. And I think there's been this idea for the past couple of years to kind of move away from that and kind of make everything feel, very
digital. Let's call it digital.
Digital, right, digital. And so I do think that there is an element of going back to some organic elements that I am seeing there. And then I think on the West Coast, it's been interesting because there's this proliferation of these like healthy, better for you brands that are kind of naturally coming out from California and from the West, and tech brands as well. And I see there's like a convergence between those two brands where it's like, is this like a healthy beverage or a wellness startup? It's like there's this kind of cross between those. And I do think at some point we'll see a little bit more delineation where those trends in other places will kind of infuse those platforms too.
Yeah, I love that subversion of of expectations, especially like I've seen it. There's a brilliant mortgage company in the UK that has this really kind of psychedelic. It could have been like a poster from the 70s, like for a rock concert, but they're a mortgage company. And I just love that kind of playful kind of reinterpretation of expectations. And I think that's the pathway to, redefining a little bit what we do. And just our emotive connection, our emotional connection to type, I think. I don't know, I think there's a lot of play happening in that space.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that well-designed products and brands before were so almost more inaccessible, right? So they were kind of considered with like a certain price point. And now with Canva and also with just access to just more design programs, and I think just inherent belief that design is a profit driver. And I think even in-house brands, having really adapted to really refining their type and their look and feel, it's made it difficult as a customer to be more discerning, right? Because you would use the type and design of things to kind of signal, oh, that's better for me, or that's been like crafted, or that's a small business, or that's a boutique brand. And it becomes more and more difficult to discern that.
Yeah, absolutely. As a graphic designer, how do you feel about the type design scene in the US? Do you think there's like a really strong sort of graphic design and type design community relationship?
Yeah. So I'm on the board of the Type Directors Club, and we're really fortunate at the Working Assembly to also house the Type Directors Club library actually within our new office. So it's been really amazing to kind of be able to house all these books that have been around for all these years and kind of store it up to actually be able to open these boxes again and give the public access to them again. So I think that post-pandemic, we are seeing people kind of emerge and have more gatherings to discuss things like type and design. So it's been really fun, this past year, even to move to conferences being more in in person and workshops be in person and lecturing being in person. And so I think all of those things really help factor in that sense of community. I do think that there's so many interesting foundries and type foundries that have been popping up. I think Monotype is also a huge driver in making sure that type is top of mind for designers, and the access that Monotype gives to designers is quite incredible, actually, as far as the library and the offerings. So I do think that type has just become more and more part of the discourse and what people are talking about when evaluating brands and design, and that's wonderful. I think with that, though, it's how do you continue to pull apart and create customizations and not be so reliant on the same things that everyone's using within their toolkit, and continue to try to push for better and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at Monotype, we've been doing a lot of work around discovery with AI as well, and trying to open up the library, because there's so many typefaces here. Monotype is unreal. And it's almost become our job to actually help customers, designers, brands, agencies get into the library and discover things that they may not have seen before or not seen for decades, and then give birth to them as new, because there's so much quality stuff here. Do you think there has really been an overarching or dominant theme to design at large?
Yeah, I think that this past year we've seen, again, that growing appreciation for design as a business driver. And so I do see clients making more and more an investment into design. What's interesting is that we are at this inflection point where I do think that the way that people value branding and design is different. Sometimes we'll see brands really double down on its core. They don't want to make the costly change of having to do a rebrand because there's economic implications that come from doing that. And then there's going to be others who are going to be biting to do a refresh because they feel like this is really going to be what helps drive the tide for them. So we've seen such a explosion of new products, right? Where design and brand is such a driver of differentiation. So you might, for instance, see an oat milk and you see 8 different types of oat milk. And really the only differences between the 8 are the branding and the design and the packaging form. And so I do think that with consumers being smarter and more cost aware, we'll see the right brands kind of rise to the top.
How do you feel trends affect what you do at the working assembly? Are you conscious of that as a studio, as a brand studio, or is it something you try and distance yourself from? I know that you can't really, but it's you have to engage at a certain level, but you also want to be unique and make your own marks on what the work you're doing, right?
100%. I think it's been difficult because once you do a project really well, it's natural for other clients to come and want to do a project that's very similar, or they really admire and they would like to have something that feels similar to that. We try to really resist those kind of clients, even though it seems like it would be a really easy engagement in some ways. It's really quite difficult when the benchmark is you and the project that they love is one of yours, because it can be really hard to do something that's comparable and to that same level and feels really different enough and feels purposeful enough. And so whenever we kind of onboard a client, we really try to make sure there's a strategic framework where the decisions that we're making are not based on emotion and not based on taste or individual taste, because then I think is when you get into really tricky problems, because then you are making decisions based on trends or things that you visually prefer versus what's strategically sound or will resonate and be right for the market. And I think that's what we're seeing quite a lot of. There's a lot of brands that are coming up and they look so similar to one another. And I feel for those designers, because I know that oftentimes it's probably, client and agency relationship or client and designer relationship where there is that tug and push and pull where, as a designer, you're really trying to fight for something that is different, but sometimes we'll get kind of boxed in. And so we're really in a fortunate position where we're able to kind of turn down projects that maybe aren't right for us or something too similar to something we've done before. And because we have such a wide range of designers here, we have, over 20 designers here at our kind of small studio, we're able to really bring a diversity of thinking and approach into the projects and try to make sure that no project looks too similar and feels very style agnostic, that even though it's one studio, it really feels like it's kind of like our assembly model. It's like it comes from a line of people, who are really kind of imparting their talent into the project and work.
It's amazing. I'm a huge fan of everything you're doing. I mean, amazing work. Jolene, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your view on type design and graphic design in New York, and thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, so much. Really appreciate it.
So it was really fun talking to Jolene and just hearing how she kind of wrestles with cultural trends and type trends. And I think, that's something I guess we all need to be aware of as designers. Seeing the trends, understanding the trends, but, really being self-conscious about how much you take to those trends and how much do you let that into your creative process.
Yeah, I think of trends as a kind of caution. Like, that was really great, but hey, let's go do something better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're moving on to a conversation that our colleague Emilios Theophanos had with two graphic designers based in Santiago, Chile.
Yeah, Emilios met with Alan Eaglehurst and Belen La Rivera of Futurebrand. And while they're based in Santiago, Alan and Belen work on clients throughout South America. So Emilios knew they'd have insights into type and design trends in Chile as well as their broader region. So here's Emilios in conversation with Alan and Belen. Enjoy.
Hello all, and thank you for joining us. I'm Emilio Stefanos, Creative Type Director for Monotype. I'm based in London, and last year I had the amazing joy of traveling to Chile in Santiago. And while in Santiago, I had the opportunity to meet with some great people. Two of them are together with us in this podcast. It's Belen and Alan, and I'm going to give them the floor so they can introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. This is Belen. I'm a graphic designer based in Chile, and I'm currently working as a senior brand designer in Futurebrand.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alan. I'm a graphic designer. I have a master's degree in advanced design, which is focused on combining design with business and technology. And now I work as creative director in Futurebrand Hispanic America. Futurebrand, it's a brand consultancy, and we work based in Chile, but we also work for Colombia, Peru, sometimes for Argentina, and very specific times for other countries.
Our team works in Chile, in Peru, and in Colombia, so we not only have that diversity of clients, but also we have this sense of what's going on in half of the region as well, which is very interesting.
Amazing. What trends are you seeing in Chile or any of the neighboring countries this year? And if you want to speak about graphic design trends or typographic trends, that's both equally fine and exciting.
Well, Chile mainly has a very global perspective, and for this reason, it may be a little neutral sometimes in terms of the cultural aspects. What happens in Colombia and Peru, for example, Colombia has this playfulness or this joy on their designs, and Chile, I think it's a bit more neutral and played safer from the different countries. But I think in Argentina, for example, there's a lot of courage. Maybe Argentinians have more personality than us in Chile, so they, especially in advertising, for example, they are less conservative maybe. But I think reviewing the last year report of Monotype on trends, matchmaking was one of the main trends in terms of the global type. And I think that's very common here because brands tend to play it safe on their main types, for example, but they have this balance with secondary fonts to give more playfulness maybe to their brand design and imaginary.
I think that in Chile and in the region, you have very different styles regarding to category of clients. For example, if you have a restaurant, and I think this happens maybe worldwide, people can get bolder, but if you have a retail client or a corporate one, they might want to please more audience and not having an identity system that could have a love or hate response, So we try to play with that. At the end of the day, there are a lot of clients in Chile, at least, that they prefer a balanced kind of graphic design system that trying to do something super trendy.
So I was wondering, do you try, as Futurebrand in Chile, do you try to push a bit clients to be a bit more bold or, try different directions when you propose new designs? Or I assume for big brands, I understand that this can be difficult, for the standard branding, as you mentioned, but maybe for campaigns or seasonal events or something like this, do they tend to get a bit more bold?
Yes, definitely. I think especially in smaller brands or, as you say, seasonal campaigns, clients tend to get more bold in whatever they want to do. We use that.
I think also in Chile and also the other countries on the region, brands are putting more emphasis on their tone of voice, and it has been very important for them. So type, it's the perfect match for it, like to go with a very bold personality.
If anything can make or break a brand, it's fonts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I was in Santiago, I had the opportunity to visit also the Museum of Precolombiano, which was a brilliant way to embed oneself into the history of the region, not only Colombia, but also like from Ecuador or Brazil, Argentina. In terms of like regional or national history or stories, it doesn't have to go this back. Maybe it's in the more recent past of Chile. If there's anything that you feel it connects with the current culture to typography, for example. We see a lot of movements around the world using type in a powerful and meaningful ways. Do you see anything similar in Chile?
Yeah, totally. I think everything you saw in the Museum of Precolombino has to do with the region, which is beautiful because it talks about a time where countries weren't a thing. So that's why we share all that heritage with the rest of the countries. On the other hand, I think more locally in Chile, we have some styles that, for example, in the early 19th, there was something called the popular poetry, lira popular, which were poetry that people printed. So the graphic style of lira popular was basically these sheets of poetry, but you have this big capital letter that was illustrated with a person, for example, drinking or two people like talking, like these very daily activities that accompanied this beautiful like popular poetry.
So it was like drop caps?
Yeah, drop cap, exactly.
Okay, brilliant. Do you see the style coming back? I love drop caps.
Well, actually, the Amster Typeface by Francisco Galvez have this big cap style with all of those drawings. It's beautiful.
Lira Popular also has like a bit rough and crude visual language that it's very interesting in terms of what the imperfections generate on it because of the printing and like the techniques to make this illustration. So I think that also adds a lot of personality to it.
And also in Chile, you have a lot of illustration and popular art, more like a street culture art from our dictatorship and beforehand. So I think there has been a lot of rescue about the vernacular art and street art and the artist, which is something that I think a lot of brands considerate. That's why some big brands or corporate brands try to step away from that type of styles and trends because they have a strong political approach. And everyone, it's gonna link, if you have some specific typeface style, for example, they are not gonna put those values on their brands. On the other hand, you have more editorial projects or graphic design projects that use that in their advance, all of the values that these trends have, the political views. So you have this very big separation of styles.
Yeah, I think here in Chile, at least, there was a period like 10 years ago that everything was about heritage rescue. A lot of projects appear in that way, many typographic proposals aimed at this. And I think that was interesting, but it also like has been less present nowadays. And yeah, I think as Belen was saying, it maybe depends on how all of this is related with the political situation. But also, I think there are a lot of things happening in terms of rescuing what is happening on the streets or maybe more in a more popular communication. For example, there's an artist that it's called Senen Vargas, a very recognized person that worked a lot of years in the graphics of public transportation. Senen Vargas has a lot of vernacular style with a lot of colors, with a lot of saturation on it. It also has like these little imperfections in terms of kerning, for example, but because of the boldness of the fonts, like they have a lot of details, and now it has become like a cult visual language. And maybe it's not present in the big brands, for example, but it's very recognized here in terms of the design industry. So I think, yeah, that's very interesting in terms of how you can take the heritage in different ways.
Adding to the sign painting style of Senen Vargas, we can actually see here in Chile, for example, the signs that Montoni used to draw. He died a couple of years ago, which is very similar to the fileteado porteño from Argentina. So you can see all of these similarities between the region. And another typeface is Mazurkica from Javier Quintana, which is a bold and condensed font that resembles the signs that people used to draw on the streets because they needed to add a long phrase in a short sheet, for example. So you have this bold, condensed typeface that it's intricate. Like you have these ligatures, which are very awesome. It has been great to see that, I don't know, for example, in a campaign in London, people use that typeface, where in Chile, only people aligned with that political view use it. But outside, you don't have that reference. So it's a cool case.
So, Belen, you mentioned a few typefaces and a few type designers, which I'm always excited to hear about. I think most of our listeners must know some more popular foundries, like, let's say, Latino Type and Pampa Type. How is the font foundry scene in Chile? Like, do you see a lot of new designers, for example, starting to design typography, or more independent foundries coming up?
I think Latino Type is the most influential foundry here in Chile, particularly in the retail sector. And I think they have made a very good bonds with graphic designers, which is great. Another type foundry that it's getting bigger, it's Without Foundry, like W Foundry, and they are following the same path or system as Latino Type, like having this very trendy typefaces. At the same time, you have smaller foundries Pampa Type is from Hotels in Argentina, and Francisco Galvez used to make typefaces with that type foundry, but you can also see a lot of his work by himself. Maybe there are not big foundries in Chile, but maybe typeface designers that come up with typefaces. Well, Francisco Galvez, as I said, Rodrigo Ramirez, Javier Quintana, Rodrigo Tipo. And I might add, it's sad that there are not more women typeface designers. Oh my God, I'm naming all of these guys. Anyway, having said that, I would like to add that in the graphic design scene, we do have women leading that. For example, the graphic design office of Otros Perez, they make very cool graphic design and they collaborate with typeface designers, as well as Connie Gaguero. And she had made, I think, 2 amazing projects, one with the National Historic Museum and also a very political project, which was the identity for the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the dictatorship. So, but yeah, there are a lot of specific typeface designers and specific projects that are, at least for me, that are very interesting. For example, Sergio Ramirez and Javier Quintana came up with this project of icons. It's a typeface made of icons, and icons about what we do in our daily life, which is awesome. And you can see more than 5,000 icons in different weights. And I think that kind of projects, they're amazing, and technically they're very hard to make as well. So there are a lot of things going on, but maybe in a more underground kind of scene, because all of them, they don't do a lot of social media. So a lot of that amazing work tends to stick just between the people that are surround us or surround them, and not making a very huge impact.
Yeah, and this is amazing. I think you answered already the next question I had in mind, which is if there is a strong sense of community between type and graphic designers in Chile. And I think you are very passionate about the type design scene. And from the examples you shared, it seems like there is a lot of collaboration, which is amazing because, as type designers, we don't design type for us to use. I design type for people like you to go crazy with it and be surprised by the results. So is there anything else you would like to add or any personal experiences?
I think in terms of community, maybe there's still room to build to create a better match between type foundries and designers. Like there are some initiatives or specific events, but the relationships are formed more often on an individual basis, maybe. So Latino Type has taken a role on creating a stronger bond between designers, agencies, consultancies, and type foundries. So they have been very active on that. And I think there have been a greater understanding of typographic licenses, for example. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to create a better bond on that.
Yeah, so we touched on two great questions of the universe in this small podcast, which is type licensing and design as a political instrument, as a medium, which is very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I have an anecdote, a national anecdote regarding the two things that you already said. So a couple of years ago, there was this political candidate that used one of the Latino type typefaces. So apparently one graphic designer, they bought just like one license, that's it. But they shared the file with everyone because they didn't know. I mean, it wasn't like something obscure happening. No, because no one knew about typeface licensing. So what happened was that Latino Type actually made public that, like, hey, you just bought one license. Well, of course, like the other side, the other political side used that, like, oh my God, like candidate, it's immoral or whatever. But that kind of helped to
Raise
share
awareness.
with the public. Yeah, to create awareness about licensing. And I think that it was like the first time that a lot of graphic designers were like, oh, wait, so you should buy a typeface? Like,
Yes, people, you should buy typefaces. So thank you all for joining and listening to this amazing small conversation. It's a nice trip to South America and especially Chile and the neighboring countries. Thanks so much, Belén and Alan, for your time and your insights and the beautiful stories.
thank you for having us.
I just love that they gave a shout out to Javier Quintana. His typefaces are so full of joy. They're so much fun. So if you haven't seen them, go look them up. Javier Quintana. Phil, next you're speaking with Violaine Orsoni and Jeremy Schneider of VJ Type in Paris. We both love them.
Yeah, I really admire their work. It's just wow. It's super detailed and intricate. And we actually featured their Eros typeface a few years ago when we did the trends report, which was fantastic. And there's just something about that detail, you know, that fluidity in their work. It feels very Art Nouveau. I don't know, it sits outside kind of classical type design a little bit. It feels quite pictorial and illustrated. And I feel like they're creating their own little universe, you know, they're sharing it with us. And I love that. It's super interesting.
I love that too, and I can't wait to hear about the stories behind some of their type and what they think the trends are that are happening in Paris right now. So passing it over to you, Violaine and Jeremy.
So today I'm joined by some very talented creative craftspeople. Violaine and Jeremy, it's lovely to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Phil.
I guess that's my first question. What are the typographic trends you are seeing in Paris and France this year?
I think I will see 4 trends right now in France. The first one will be rounded serif with rounded outlines, just like the font Windsor from the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the typeface exposure from the French foundry 205TF and maybe Gaia from the foundry Out of the Dark. As a second trend, I would say geometric rounded kind of reinterpretation of the postmodern Swiss design.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the maxi round from Dynamo typeface, ball peel typeface from the French typographer Benoît Baudouin. Yeah, I would say maybe bust typeface, also from our French Roman foundry lift type, also French. So I also see a trend of like funky, bold, black reinterpretation of the 70s organic fun fonts. Last tendance, I will say the italic decorative swatches like Margot Lévesque's romantic swatches.
Amazing. Like, as you see quite a nostalgic kind of vibe then in general.
Completely.
Definitely, yeah.
What do you guys think is behind these trends?
It's always hard to say, but from our point of view, and maybe from like a general point of view, it feels like style with a big S is back, because we've been through kind of a decade of sans serif, uniform, low profile typographic logos. And, you know, all these fashion brands, they all rebranded one after another, and they just wouldn't stop like having like super normal and standard logos and graphic identities. It was sad, you know, and a bit boring actually. I didn't really like this trend. And I think we finally got over that, and we're back to something with, you know, much more energy and imperfection and curves and rhythm and fun. I think it's refreshing. We like it.
Yeah, me too. I think there's like a bit more of a celebration of decoration, of ornamentation in form, in typographic form, and it's exciting.
And I think in France, also graphic designers like to twist, reinterpret, and play with utilitarian design.
Yeah, just like, you know, the signs of craftsman store with the typography that they stretched or compressed to fit, you know, the front of the store, and they distorted the font. And so it really changed the nature and the proportion of the typography, but they didn't realize that it was like completely changing the nature and the aesthetic of the typography. But today, like this hasty and like poorly worked deformation are deliberately recuperated by contemporary graphic design, and we can see that quite a lot. It's a bit of an insider's wink, you know. Not everybody can understand where this comes from, but when you are a type designer and graphic designer, you can understand that it's not well done on purpose.
Maybe another example, we saw like highway signage aesthetic. We saw this in production type, like the signal typeface specimen design, and maybe also gas station graphic design in lift type, their typeface samplon specimen. So yeah, that's other example who speak about this trend, I think.
Behind all these trends, do you think there is like any underpinning kind of cultural or current culture story that's really kind of influencing the way our world looks today, our typography that we're seeing?
I don't know if there's such a big story. It's like trend, it's like fashion, and I think actually that the utilitarian design thing comes from fashion itself and not graphic design or from typography. It comes from like clothes fashion. I don't know how it is in the UK or in the US, but here we see many people wearing utilitarian clothes, you know, just as a fashion statement. So, like I have in mind the delivery man style, you know, with the short sleeve shirt, super bright and tonic colors, and the logo that is sewed on the pocket. Or another style that is also, for me, I call utilitarian, is the motor racing style, you know, with flashy neon colors and all the shapes that are super energetic and with sharp movements in the design. And for me, this is kind of where it comes from. So it comes from fashion. But apart from this, there's something so global in the Western world. It's not always easy to identify where and when all this come from. So everything is kind of spread via the social media, and after this, each region they add, you know, a little bit of it of themselves onto the global trend. And we could see identities that kind of look alike in New York, in Amsterdam, or in Mexico, because it's kind of global.
I'm definitely seeing that sense of utility in the UK as well, just like in fashion specifically, like in terms of overshirts, single pockets, and just really like minimal, even like the classic Carhartt kind of jackets, workwear jackets. You see that all, everywhere, especially where I work, which is East London. So it's a big thing there.
Yeah. And designers, like graphic designers in France, we noticed that they are not really interested in talking about elegance. There's always been this complex, you know, to not be considered as an intellectual profession. So designers never talk about beauty. They kind of fear that beauty is really not enough or just gratuitous, which we don't agree with, for sure, because beauty requires kind of a lot of work, know-how, balance, and it's hard to obtain. But once you obtain that, it's like a super powerful vector of transmission, touches like the heart, like super quickly instead of the head, and it's like it really imprints on you. But I don't know, there's something in France. I don't know if it's the same around the world, but definitely in France, graphic and typographic designers, they don't want to talk about beauty. No interest in that.
It's really interesting because I don't know, from an outsider kind of perspective, I think of French design, Parisian design as really very imbued with that idea of ornamental and decoration and the detail and just it architecturally, just as a visitor's perspective, it's like, wow, this is a place that's really rich in kind of visual nuance, and it's almost like there's a rebellion against that right now, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And this is why I don't understand why people, they don't want to identify to beauty, because we are a people of like decorative savoir-faire and decorative beauty. And I don't understand this thing.
Yeah.
But it's coming back a little bit.
Yeah.
So what's the type foundry scene like in Paris today? Is there a strong sense of community amongst type and graphic designers?
France is a bit of a cultural exception. So we don't have the culture of what you call community here. This is like a very Anglo-Saxon thing, if I may say. Most of the people in France, they don't consider themselves belonging to any community. And I think this applies to graphic designers and to typographers. And also could be a fun fact, but it's actually not so fun. Even if it's changing today, to put it nicely, French people are not very used to pay for typography. So you can ask any French typographers about this, you will get the same answer.
Yeah, even in medium size and large agencies, there is, or maybe there was, no consideration for typography copyrights. They completely respect copyright for literature, photography, and images in general. But for graphics and typography, it's a bit more complicated. This is cultural for good established graphic designer to credit typographer and typography, but it's a niche, I think.
I have this story about my cousin. My cousin, south of France, he has like a little business, okay? And he hired a graphic designer and he asked him to use one of our fonts, okay? Like the Dahlia font from our foundry. And last time I visited him, so he was like super proud of showing me, yeah, I use your font, blah, blah. And he told me, but you know what? When I asked my designer, okay, are you sure you paid for the font, right? And the designer said, no, no. So my cousin had to tell him, okay, go and buy the font right now. Yeah, there's work to do.
Yeah, there's definitely work to do there for sure.
Yeah.
When you read through your website, I think it says your ethos as a foundry is about drawing strong and peculiar fonts. And I was just curious to know what that idea really means to you guys and your customers.
We come from graphic design, right? We did not begin as typographers. So we say strong and peculiar because we mostly design display fonts and because we don't do a lot of text font. When we do a new font, the first thing that we aim for is just pleasure and do something beautiful that we would use ourselves in our own designs. We never ask ourselves, is it going to be like a commercial success? So we don't really have a customer point of view because it's not really our focus. And I think it's a good thing because, the way that we are just true to our design is what is best for any creative mind anyway. And when we say strong and peculiar font, it's because our typefaces, they often come from logo lettering proposal, So as we design first like lettering, like logos, at one point, we identify which proposal could make a nice full glyph set and we go for it. But it's difficult to go from a logo with like so few letters to a full glyph set. The balance is very, very different because it's easy to go too far, into the stylistic exercise. Yeah, we have to be careful from that.
It almost sounds like you yourselves are your own customers. If you're not happy with it, then you're not putting it out there. You want to work and attract the kind of customers that appreciate the stuff you're doing. And I really admire that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, your work is super precise. You're making type that's kind of heavily influenced from, craft, mark making, interior design, illustration. How do you balance that kind of need for perfection in your work? Because perfection is a tricky thing to deal with as a type designer.
Yeah. As a studio, we are driven by beauty. We always work to obtain a very precise result, but it is very time consuming. Our work is fastidious and diligent. We don't have like a casual style. And we have 3 activities at the studio: graphic design, illustration, and typography. But luckily for typography, it's easier for us to get help or delegate some task, which isn't for illustration or graphic design. For font development, the whole technical process doesn't require a certain style of aesthetic. It needs an expert technical eye, which can see the mistakes and sound the alarm sometimes when there is a lack of coherence in different styles.
But, perfection is, well, first of all, it really does not exist because it's perfection for us, but maybe it's not perfection for somebody else. It doesn't make any sense for us to produce a work that we are not happy with. There is no meaning for us to do such things. So yeah, we just like spend time. And as Jeremy just said, we never go like casual. Okay, let's do like this tiny thing. And yeah, it's gonna be easy. And it's not our mindset. And we don't know how to work this way anyway. It's always kind of hard work and fastidious work.
So I have one final question. How do you feel about our type industry today? And I guess it's 2 questions. Do you have a vision for the future of VJ type?
It's not like I'm a market expert, but I'm just gonna give our point of view. So I feel like, the type industry, it has kind of no middle ground. It's like super big foundries or super tiny foundries. And just like in every cultural field, the creative buzz, it always emerges from the small structure. But the big foundries, they do also a very important job, which is like setting the business rules and popularizing the type culture through the global market. So, I mean, this is my vision. So it's very complementary. And maybe about like to finish about our foundry, when we launched VeggieType, it was just like a side project, a passion project. We didn't expect anything from it. And we had a very, very warm welcome. So it was a very, very nice surprise for us. Well, until now, we went with the flow. But maybe today we're starting to think of making the foundry a little bit more professional. We'd like to have a bit more structure. It doesn't mean more people, but it means more structure as a business, as licensing, as commercial prices and all, because we really want to live long. We don't want the foundry to live only 10 years. We want it to be a long-term project. And that's why I would say we will always have like a small foundry. We don't want to grow bigger, because we really need our freedom. But we are looking, to surround ourselves with people who could help us make this vision happen in the future.
Violaine and Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your insights on type trends around France today and the future of VJ type, of course. It was super insightful and so great to meet you both. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, Phil.
Thank you very much.
So I love the work that those guys are doing at VJ Type. They have this slight nostalgic kind of interpretation of kind of type of the past, and there's almost like a 70s nostalgic thing again, but it also feels very contemporary as well, and very appropriate for now. So all right, we're on to our final interview now with Joanne Chu from Fictionist Studio in Kuala Lumpur, and you hosted this one, Charles. So what made you want to talk to Joanne about trends in Kuala Lumpur and Asia?
Well, I lived in Kuala Lumpur for a short time, a very long time ago now. It's a really cool place. It's got a great vibe. It's very much a cultural crossroads. And Joanne and Fictionist have been doing great work for a while now, so it seemed logical to turn to her for a Southeast Asian typographic pulse.
Nice, that's amazing. So handing it over to you and Joanne for our final conversation.
Hello, I'm speaking today with Joanne Chu. She's the founder of the Fictionist Studio, which is an award-winning independent creative studio based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Their work has been recognized by D&AD Awards, the Type Directors Club, Art Directors Club, and D-Zine Awards. And I reached out to Joanne because, based on her track record and her obvious cultural curiosity, I was pretty sure she'd have her finger on the pulse of type and creativity in KL and the region. Welcome, Joanne.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you for the kind introduction.
So why don't we jump right in? What typographic trend or trends are you seeing in KL, Kuala Lumpur, and the neighboring countries or region this year?
It's really quite diverse. So one thing I've actually really seen that keeps popping up is basically the usage of the combination of script or cursive font together with sans serif font, sort of like the combination of both of that. There's like quirky lettering that has a lot of sass and personality, usage of characters with like quite a lot of diverse characteristics like spiky, handwritten. Yeah, so definitely quite a mixed bag, I would say.
Can you sort of tease out any through lines behind that? What do you think is behind this sort of rampant diversity?
I think it's really a lot of factors at play, the lingering aftermath of the pandemic and people really being cooped up and really wanting to express themselves. And also, of course, the influence of social media. Designers see what's going on internationally or what's happening in pop culture and wanting to manifest that also in their designs. I think as a nation, we are coming out more into our own identity. In Malaysia, there's this slang called chapalang. It means like it's really a mixture of various elements and mostly at random. And I think that it's because of us sort of like really coming into our own that's being manifested through designs and type as well.
I'd love to dig more into that. So can you tell a little bit about the sort of local, regional, national story that connects that current cultural trend to the current typography?
Sure. I think that in terms of Malaysia, the country I'm from, we are sort of like witnessing sort of like an emergence of creativity from the performing arts or even retail and fashion. And in Malaysia, the Michelin Guide has just started to come in. So a lot of top-notch quality restaurants are coming up. A lot of businesses, and just from my experience of also running the studio, a lot of the younger generation, second generation who have legacy businesses are really wanting to create brands that are different and eschewing what was done before traditionally. And so seeking out design solutions and branding aspects that are not typically done from before. Because of that, I think designers are also more ramped up in trying different things to create more interesting, groundbreaking solutions for clients. In terms of the music scene, there's a lot of like underground DJ events, music festivals, food festivals that are happening. And because of that, you need marketing collaterals for that. And designers are also having to be more expressive and being experimental as well. And usage of fonts, different fonts or even lettering are sort of like more apparent. There's a lot of art book fairs that are happening regionally. There's the Singapore Art Book Fair, the KL Art Book Fair, the Jakarta Art Book Fair, and Bangkok Art Book Fair. There are a lot more design conferences that are happening in Southeast Asia. So I think that's sort of like what's happening here regionally.
I like the unique Malaysian flavor, especially the KL flavor of a culture that is, unbeknownst, I think, to a lot of people, sort of its own kind of melting pot.
Yes.
So it's predisposed to be very sort of mix-up style, or a mix of styles. But there is a lot of fluidity, too, as you've described it, between the different cultural expressions, like the culture of dance and the culture of music and the culture of nightlife, design, art. It's interesting, too, to sort of see it grow further and further away from the sort of yoke of colonialism into something that is much more itself. If you're tapped into the font foundry scene or people who are making type in KL and Malaysia, do you have any connections there?
Yes. So I think previously also, I think it was featured in the monotype trends. H Huruf is a type collective, and separately HRF Type is also a type foundry. I've spoken to my good friend Swelly about it, and I've asked her, when is your launch? And she's telling me that towards the third quarter, end of the year, she'll be having the website up. I think independently, there are a lot more, not really full-fledged type designers, but more graphic designers that intersect with their type design practice. We also organize some workshops and events together with Rainer Schahabauer from Glyphs. So he loves Malaysia, and he has been coming here last year and the year before last. And we will usually conduct a workshop together with Huruf, my friend Swelly. So having him around also and sharing his wisdom and techniques have also helped with designers getting more information and also learning how to use the software, and so we can see the results from that too in their design work.
That's fantastic.
Yes, and he's really lovely to have around, and we like to show him around and let him try different types of food as well.
I love that.
And if you do come, Charles, please let me know. I would love to take you around. I think the melting pot really comes from our food, and we're really proud of the types of offerings that we have in this part of the world.
Yeah, it's been a couple of decades since I was there, and it was already on a rocket ship of change at that point. I'm sure it's really a completely different place than I remember. But the food, of course, remains. So I can't wait to get back.
Yes, please do come. I know it's a long journey, but if you do stop by to Australia, or if you do go to Bangkok, just hop on the plane and come visit.
Absolutely. Before we say jumpa lagi,
Oh.
Where do people go to see work from you and Fictionist?
You can check us out on our website, fictionist.studio, or on Instagram, the same handle, Fictionist Studio.
Joanne, thank you so much for taking the time to talk through a little bit, and I can't wait to see the visuals. Please keep us abreast of everything that's going on typographically and design-wise in Malaysia. I'll be checking in periodically.
I'll be happy to. Thank you so much for having me.
I love the connection between design and creativity in Malaysia that Joanne is making there, and how mixing design elements like blending cursive fonts with sans serif fonts, for example, can be a sort of metaphor for the blend of cultures that exists in places like Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's fun that there's so much mixing going on across the planet. I know that that's sort of like saying in a way that there's a sort of sameness to what's going on, but people are really mixing it up. I feel really lucky that we get to talk to creative people every day, you and I feel doubly lucky when it involves talented people halfway across the world.
So if you'd like to check out the work from the lovely people we spoke with in this interview, head over to our show notes. We've included links in there. And speaking of trends, if you want to learn more about type trends, consider joining our Type Trends webinar on March the 21st. You can find details and sign up at monotype.com/type-trends-2024.
As always, look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode, and check out monotype.com/podcast to read all about our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please rate it and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin, Mia Sullivan, and Marie Tabarez. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care.